Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities in Miniatures, and it's Friday, which means I bring to you yet another obscurity in literature. I should say another oversized, overpriced obscurity in literature. And I speak none other than Coffin, Yoshitaka Amano's Art of Vampire Hunter D. So I know if you grew up way back when in the 90s, the ever so distant 90s, Vampire Hunter D was one of those entry points for a lot of young folks into the world of anime. Or manga, as they like to say back then. I don't recall when I first saw it, but I know it was a big deal at the time. It was grown up, so to speak, in terms of the content, because after all, only little kids watch cartoons. I mean, that was, in the era of MTV doing Adult Swim and Eon Flux and fun things like that. But this had a big impact on us, and I remember just being blown away with the movie at the time. I don't think it's aged as well as the sequel. Bloodlust, I think, is a much better movie, much closer to the original, or at least the translated original texts. One of the cool things about this book and everything else, Dark Horse has put out a ton of D material in English. I know both myself and Sparkle Trout used to voraciously read through all of the novels as they were translated. Unfortunately, I've read so many of them, I don't remember which is which. I know I've read most of the ones that the movies were based on, and there were a couple, I think there were some two-parters, in fact, but yeah, read a lot. There were some interesting people in those books. Anyway, big, fat, thick, heavy book, and it is horribly bound. And I don't know if this edition is much different than the original Japanese. Now you can hear it, I think. You hear that creak of just opening the cover. That scares me. I've had this book for a few years, and I'm just every time I pull it off the shelf, I'm afraid I'm going to destroy it. It's going to be like just a loose leaflet portfolio by the time I'm done. But I'm going to do it for you guys. I love when you open it up. If only that was like an actually original illustration. I'd like to pretend it is. It's not. At least I don't think it is. That'd be pretty dang awesome if it was, though. You have Dee's eyes there. I also think it's supposed to be Dee's eyes. There's something on the back. More scribbly stuff. I have no idea what I'm looking at there. That's okay. So, interestingly enough, the book is a mix of both English and Japanese. I don't know what the original Japanese one was. We've got the little intro that's in the books. I'm not going to spoil it, so in case you ever get a chance to read it. But this is just an amazing look at Amano's art. And I want to say most of these were probably done prior to his involvement with Squaresoft and Final Fantasy and everything that came after. And it's just interesting how charismatic D looks even back then. There's a little bit of text from the novels. There's some very rough sketch work here, and I'm not going to go through every page, but I have always dug his D paintings. D looks so delicate and fragile, but if you get a chance to read the books, he is an absolute monster, and you can see absolutely the inspiration for Alucard, I think, in both dress and design. And just big, gorgeous illustrations. I always thought Amano had a bit of a European influence on his artwork, but I always love these. Now, most of these are from the interiors of a lot of the original. I think this is the original book. I always like that one. Definitely from the first book. This was the wallpaper on my computer for many years. I always liked that one. There's no knocking Amano's color work. I've always dug D. Good old left hand. I believe that was the cover of the original book. I could be wrong, but I think it was. Just those uses of, both black and white space in the framework. Most of these were like spot illustrations in the original novels. I guess you can probably consider them light novels. I think that's the official classification, what they would be considered in Japan, especially the way they've churned them out over the years. Again, you can see a bit of where things were headed when he would eventually get to doing Final Fantasy. Some of the various monsters. I always saw D, especially in these older ones, as kind of the progenitor of the Warriors of Light that he would go on to illustrate in those early Final Fantasy games. I always love these shots where he's like, flying, leaping forward with his sword. That looks familiar. Didn't they do something like that with Bloodlust? I know I had that book for a moment or two. In case you have forgotten, Vampire Hunter D is actually a bit of a post-apocalyptic story, and the books have a very Western feel to them. That book I think I still have sitting upstairs. Death City. It's interesting how he looks a bit more masculine in some of these as the time goes. Whereas the first ones, he looks very, I don't want to say effeminate, but very gender neutral. It's probably more the word I'm thinking. I mean, even just like the squiggly lines, you can't see it, it's so light. It becomes quite evocative. And there's just so many. This looks like the one where he ends up North Seas Navigators. I was going to say where he's on the barge. It's interesting just in how what looks like just, a scribbly mess at some points, has very defined, definite meaning to it. I remember one book where they had like a pair of twins and like one of them fought better asleep or something, or he had like astral projections, and there's one book where they had like this guy that would mark his territory as his country and was invincible if he was within the realm of his country or something. There's some weird characters in the D books. As you can see, there's a nice blend of both color and black and white. It's fun that, having read most of the books, every now and then pulling it off the shelf, seeing stuff I don't really remember. This looks like something out of like Guin Saga or something. Guin Saga is an interesting one. I always thought, I know Kentaro Miura, the guy that did Berserk, was really influenced by it. I read some of the novels they tried to translate into English. That's some interesting stuff. Definitely a very dark fantasy. Not a lot like D, though. D has a very high fantasy, lost technology, post-apocalyptic feel to it. Hey, it's Midgard. Death City. I love his color work. absolutely interesting. Is it Clint, Gustav Clint, that I'm thinking of, that has like all the weird little kind of section off panels of color and design? Always thought that had to have been an influence on Amano. Now I just want to go play Castlevania. Unfortunately. Lots of battles, lots of D flying. I don't remember that. I don't know what that is. As minimalist as we can make it. But yeah, I'm skipping over huge swaths of this book, and unfortunately, I dared to look at Amazon, and it was absolutely ridiculously priced. So the earliest, well, no, these aren't even the earliest order. Looks like the earliest piece in this is from '83. Wow. That was a while ago. Of course, prior to that, if you guys aren't aware, I know Amano was working for Tatsunoko Productions, actually. When did this come out? This book originally came out in 1997, but did not come out in English until 2006. That's a pretty big gap. But it did take a while for the D books to actually come out in English, so that might be part of it. Interesting book, especially if you are a fan of the novels or the movies, or if they had any impact on you growing up. I just wish that, as is always the case with, you know, big, clunky art books in very odd and exotic formats, it just is going to be a hard one to both find and hold on to. Like, here, let me give you an example of just how large this is. So this is a regular-sized comic. And you want to talk about funky obscurities. Should we talk about Bean World one of these days? I feel like we should talk about Bean World one of these days. I don't know if people are familiar with Bean World. Maybe it's before your time, but yeah, that's how big this book is. It's huge. So, be aware if you do end up going searching for it. I'm not even going to bother putting an Amazon link. Last I saw that people were asking for like $250 or something stupidly ridiculous. I mean, it's a cool book, but considering the binding of it, how freaking heavy it is, and how obnoxious it is to try to get back into this slipcase, especially if you keep the runner on there, it's going to be a challenge. So, food for thought. Good luck hunting. Maybe there's a better priced version. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll actually get some decent D manga to complement all of the novels. And hey, maybe we'll get a third movie while we're at it, right? Fingers crossed. With that said, this has been High Lord Tamberlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and D, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye. This is from, oh shoot, I don't even remember, but yeah, I gotta get him painted up. Anyway, we'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.